Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar with Greg Tornman from AGCO Corporation, entitled How AGCO Corporation is Leading the Way to a State-of-the-Art Global Transportation Management System. Just quickly before we get started, I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we do have two summits coming up in October and November. The first one is the Supply Chain Management Strategies Summit from the 22nd to the 23rd of October 2018. And then the second one is the American version of the same summit, at which Greg will actually be speaking, and that's from the 26th to the 28th of November. If you'd like to find out more detail about that, you can use the Resources tab on the webinar auditorium. It's just to the right of where you're watching the slides, on a little tab above the description. There you'll be able to find some more details about the summits. And if you look below the webinar screen, you'll find an Ask a Question box. You can use this either to tell us of any technical difficulties you may be having, or also to ask Greg a question, as he will be doing a short Q&A at the end of the session. So with all of that in mind, I would like to pass over to Greg. So thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Rihanna. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Greg Tornman. I'm Global Vice President for Materials Management Logistics at AGCO Corporation. And today I'll talk to you a little bit about one of our very successful journeys in the area of supply chain. Okay. So we'll give you a little introduction about AGCO, and from there talk to the actual initiative itself. And thirdly, we'll talk a bit about the results. And then fourth, we'll talk about the outlook and where we're going with that. So many of you may not be aware of AGCO, but we are the third largest agricultural manufacturer in the world. We were basically 29 years old, founded in 1990, and have 20,000 employees worldwide as of the beginning of 2018, and 2017 revenues of $8.3 billion. Our business landscape is essentially 60%, almost 60% in Europe, 22% North America, 13% in South America, and about 9% in what we call APAC. Okay. You may not know of our brands, but in North America, we produce 95% of Caterpillar's Challenger agricultural equipment. We bought that from them back in the early 2000s. Fendt, which is a major German line, very popular in Europe and known as the Rolls-Royce of tractors. We have our GSI business unit, which is grain silos and protein feeding systems for poultry and pork. Massey Ferguson, which most folks in the U.S. understand that brand or know that name for a number of years, and then Valtra, which is a major brand we have in Europe and in South America. We have a large global footprint of 54 manufacturing locations and approximately 20 different aftermarket distribution centers across the globe, making things challenging for my team on a regular basis. So a bit about the initiative. Okay. So back in 2012, we rolled out a global strategy called a platform strategy for the engineering of our products: combines, tractors, sprayers, balers, pretty much all types of agricultural equipment. And with that, we understood, based on that strategy, that the demands of the supply network would be changing over time as we were migrating away from, call it a regionally or site-focused supply network, and we've been migrating to one that would be building products, common products in multiple locations across the globe, with wanting the ability and flexibility to shift volume, shift mix, and shift product with short-term notice. Today, we basically have 6,000 supplier shipping locations across the globe, and typically, on average per year, have about 14,500 transportation relationships, meaning origin and destination points. So as I mentioned, we set an objective of moving away from a regional or site-specific supply network and wanted to migrate to one that was much more global and in support in terms of the ability of a supplier to support needs anywhere with short-term notice, which meant that we needed to put together a model that would have all of our suppliers connected on one instance of our transportation management system, as well as one instance of our supplier B2B instance, which we utilize SAP's S&C module, which many of you may also know as EDI. Okay. With that, the focus that we had was not only to create a very adaptive and flexible network, but to have the ability to have global transparency on product flows, where product is at any one point in time, reduce our aggregated and leveraged transportation cost, increase our network performance in terms of the freight carriers, whether that's international or domestic, and with the result of having a much more stable and consistent inbound flow, be able to reduce the inventories that we typically carry. And as a result of this, what we call building a foundation on the inbound side, we also were doing this as what we call readiness or preparation in terms of supporting our integrated business planning model, which is what we're starting to do now. Before we could do that, we needed to get these other areas basically in place on a global basis. So as we started to look at the large strategy of where we wanted to go back in 2012, we basically said that we need to look at innovative approaches that would enable AGCO to handle multiple levels of complexity. An example of that would be many companies have moved to utilize, say, 3PLs to manage their inbound freight network. In our European instance, where we rolled this initiative out first, we essentially had 3 large 3PLs that managed about 80% of our inbound transportation spend. And we evolved from having 3 to having 70 different carriers. And most people say, well, that's increasing your complexity. Yes, it is, and yes, it did. But with the innovation, we saw the opportunity to generate a nice return in terms of cost and performance. The second element that we looked at was increasing the transparency. And with that, have the ability to see where a product is at a point in time, from the time that the supplier ships it or that we AGCO ship it out to a customer until the time that it hits the destination location. Third area that we focused on was reducing risks. And with that, we developed with a partner by the name of Risk Methods, a software functionality that basically had all of our inbound supplier information in it. Think of it in terms of DUNS numbers or various control numbers. And with that, the ability to, from a regional perspective and Risk Methods, multimedia and search methodologies, kind of think of how Google operates, we're able to pick up on any type of, call it weather conditions, port strikes, geopolitical activities, whatever it may be, and there is a relationship between a material planner, transportation planner, and a supplier. So if one of your suppliers in your network or span of control has something pop up, you immediately get alerted to that. And as a result of that, are able to proactively, as much as possible, take the appropriate action to resolve the issue and solve the potential risk, right? Again, potential is the key there. And the fourth element, which is improve performance. So with these 4 building blocks of our vision, we needed to basically develop an integrated approach that viewed these elements into a converging solution. And we first started off in terms of innovation in the transportation management sector. And with that, we did a maturity study with all 4 regions where we came together, and each region basically presented where they were at in a various range of, let's call it 12 different categories within transportation. And within that, we understood where we were at, which region was the most mature, which one was the least. And we then set where we wanted to be in 5 years' time, which was, let's call it the end of 2017. With that, we also then defined where we wanted to focus first, which was our least mature region, which is in Europe. It just happened to be also our largest in terms of business volume. And what we were at in terms of a maturity level at the point in time was very limited cross-plant leveraging in terms of inbound freight management. And as a result of that, lots of opportunity to leverage. Secondly, we basically had different operating expectations to our supply base. And, it became quite clear early on that our suppliers saw that as a challenge of doing business with AGCO, because in Europe we could have had, say, 8 to 12 different methodologies for managing inbound transportation requirements for what the suppliers had to plan with or utilize in supporting our delivery schedules. Okay. And as we then had defined which region we were going to work in, we defined that we needed to go out and find a partner that would enable us to, one, help manage the complexity that we had, secondly, manage the cost optimization, and third, support our network in a proactive manner. And at that point in time, the term 4PL was relatively very new and viewed as almost leading edge approach or almost bleeding edge approach to how to drive your transportation management system. And what we had done is looked around the globe at various types of service providers, and we settled on a company by the name of 4Flow, which also works hand in hand with an Austrian company by the name of iNet. So iNet has the TMS. 4Flow brings the what we call AI and optimization and dynamic balancing functionality or innovation to the party. And what that essentially enabled us to do through the various service provider reviews was select a hybrid approach, which you see here, which would be a flexible way of operating with a standardized set of processes. And what do I mean by flexible? In Europe, where we did not really have a large transportation management team, we only had about 4 people because the 3PLs managed all of the tactical execution. So what we were able to do in Europe is partner with 4Flow. Their team basically managed the tactical execution, where the AGCO team manages the commercial negotiations with suppliers, etc. The question may be, why did we select 4Flow? They actually were on the Gartner Magic Quadrant for TMSs with a special focus on large global organizations with low to medium volumes and high degrees of complexity. And what we were able to realize through that partnership was a very fast and effective implementation schedule. Basically from the beginning to the end was 18 months. And we were able to implement 1,500 suppliers over that course of 18 months and very limited pushback from the suppliers. One of the key factors in that, as I mentioned earlier, we were a difficult customer to deal with just from a perspective of ways of working and the expectations that we had. And if a supplier was shipping to, as I mentioned earlier, say 8 AGCO locations in Europe, they may have had 8 different ways of supporting our needs. And as we implemented this, the supplier said, wow, this is much simpler for us. You've got one standardized way of working. We like this very much. To the tune of, they asked the question, when will you be implementing this in the other AGCO regions that those same suppliers ship to? So that was a big benefit. 4Flow helped us with that as well. So we talked a bit about what are the benefits or what do we get from our TMS or what we call our ITMS. And it starts off with the strategic planning, which essentially takes a look at your larger network. How are you set up today? What modes do you use? What frequencies? What is it that you want your transportation management system to deliver to your factories, to your customers, and to your aftermarket? The second step was setting up the dynamic optimization and what we call tactical optimization, which is essentially putting together all of your what we call PFEP data, plan for every part, but that's nothing more than your packaging dimensions at the part number level. And when I say part number level in Europe, it's close to 75,000 active purchase part numbers that we gather the PFEP data upon, put it into our TMS, and then this allows the TMS to determine the optimized mode for the different movements. And within that tactical optimization, we essentially are able to have what I would call adaptive TMS that basically adapts the right mode to the right amount of space and weight that a supplier may be shipping the following day. With that, the way that it works is the supplier will get their shipping requirements for us. the day before that product is scheduled to ship, they will load or create their transportation order in our system. It will then go into together with all the other suppliers, map out, what is the best way for tomorrow's outbound loads to ship, and then it will assign a mode and a carrier. When it assigns that mode and carrier, the tender goes out to the transportation carrier, and from there, the transportation carrier has 1 hour to confirm the pickup. If they don't, then it goes down to the second carrier, third carrier, fourth carrier, depending on where their capacity is at. And typically, we're running around 85% of our loads are handled by the primary carrier. We then looked at the route optimization, which basically was similar to what you would look at from a milk run setup, but more from a forward-looking based on what the forward demand requirements were going to be. Typically, companies would look at their route setups based on historical setups. In our case, we looked into the future because we had the demand data integrated into the TMS to create the space and weight requirements by lane. And as a result, we were able to do more forward-looking route optimization. Mode came into that as well. Transport ordering, as I mentioned earlier, and then we've got the dynamic balancing, which basically helps define what the right mode is. As I mentioned earlier, exception management is more along the lines of performance management. So if a supplier creates a transportation order and there's some data elements that are not correct, we're able to pick up on that really quickly and then adjust it before the transportation order goes to the carrier for tender. We also then have the freight cost management, and essentially what that is how we pay the carrier. So the carriers submit their invoices directly into our TMS via the online portal, and with that, it essentially does not allow a carrier to submit a invoice that does not match what we had previously agreed to. So many companies today use a freight audit and pay to reactively catch the discrepancies. We proactively prevent discrepancies from happening. Okay. And then we get down to reporting and performance. So with these technologies, we're able to very quickly drive some major improvements in our cost, performance, etc. As I mentioned, here are some examples of that where, and this is an example from down in Brazil, and typical, milk run where, one day you may have a full truck, the second day maybe it's only 50% full, the third day it may only be 30% full. And, part of that is driven by how historically, we would be running products down our assembly lines. And to put it in perspective, imagine if you had a Toyota Corolla on your assembly line, and then right behind that you had a large Kenworth semi, Class 8 truck. That is the type of variability that we have in our assembly lines. And as a result of that, wide-ranging product mix, our inbound freight loads vary quite a bit. And as a result, this is what we used to have, where we would set up milk runs or pickups, and we would not be able to optimize our space. And by not doing that, you're not optimizing your cost. Another example is in terms of the carrier reliability. And I can imagine today many of you, as we have had challenges with getting carriers just to have capacity to move the loads that we want to move from a point A to point B. What we've done with that is take that forward-looking demand at the part number level, cross that with the PFEP data, so the space and the weight, the packaging dimensions, and can share with our carriers a forward-looking capacity requirement by day, by lane, over the next 12 months. And what that then does is enables the carriers to basically better plan their assets, whether that's trucks or drivers, and tell us if they see a potential challenge or not. And then again, what we're accomplishing with that is time, right? We're able to find out sooner than later that there may be a potential issue that needs to be worked, rather than after the shipment didn't already get picked up, right? So proactive versus reactive. This whole piece right here in example 2 is something that we view as how do you become a shipper of choice? And the way that you do that, or one way you can do that, is to become an easier customer to do business with. That can either be efficiency factor, communications, or other, call it, benefits of that relationship. But this has been a big hit for us so far in the last several years. A couple other examples is as we were able to provide our carriers and our shipping suppliers and our shipping sites with their overall performance versus the TMS requirements. So in the case of a supplier, very quickly we know, as I mentioned, if they did not create the transportation order correctly, whether it's incorrect data, missing data, whatever it may be, and they get a kind of a little penalty for that. And we managed to put all of those different checks and balances on the supplier or the carrier performance into our overall supplier performance management system, something we call APEX. And then that rolls out to how that carrier or how that supplier's overall performance is to AGCO. And now for AGCO, within our APEX system, we have 4, call it, general areas of performance. We've got the engineering side, we've got the quality side, we've got the purchasing side, and then we've got the materials management logistics side. So within this, it becomes very transparent on a global basis. If a supplier is not performing in one area, these are quick discussion topics for the meetings that we may have, whether it's an engineering meeting, quality meeting, purchasing meeting, or logistics meeting. We have visibility and can have those discussions with suppliers from a cross-functional perspective, and they typically get the picture real quick that AGCO is serious. We've seen the overall performance on the carrier side go from, let's call it 70% to 95 to 98% on a sustained basis. And on a supplier basis, we've seen things range from around 65% when we first started to close to 95%, what we call perfection. And for those of you that don't view perfection as a reasonable expectation, it starts with having perfection. And if you don't have that, you're never going to get there. Another example of ease of doing business, as I mentioned, is the One Global Platform. Now, that within a region is very helpful where you've got multiple suppliers shipping to multiple sites. In this particular case, where we have suppliers shipping to global AGCO locations. So it's very common that I could have a supplier in Europe shipping to 20 different AGCO locations across the globe. We've got one standard platform for that. And with that, the suppliers in the different regions, countries, etc., have a wide range of languages, right? And our TMS is basically has everything from Finnish to Brazilian Portuguese to Portugal Portuguese to Chinese, both Mandarin and Cantonese. And with that, it becomes very flexible and easy to work with for not only our carriers, but also our direct material suppliers, as well as our own transportation planners and material planners. So as a product is moving out of China, going down to Brazil, the supplier in China would be loading and creating it in Mandarin, and the material or transportation planner in Brazil would see all that information in Portuguese, which works out perfect. Again, a strategy for us to become a customer of choice with our direct material supplier, and secondly, to become a shipper of choice with our transportation service providers. So where are we at? So as of today, 2018, we have all 4 regions rolled out. South America will be completely rolled out with all of their suppliers by Q4, which will put 3,000 suppliers on this network, all utilizing the one standard instance. And with that, we have one of the largest integrated transportation management systems in the world today, and it works out quite well. On average, we have 28,000 transportation orders per month and have been able to implement about 750, and that number now is probably closer to 850 different saving initiatives around the world. It's been very, very beneficial for us and been a huge win for our organization. After we implemented in Europe and we had the financial review before we moved on to China, our initial business case ROI, return on investment, was 42%. What we actually delivered at the end was a 72% ROI. So you can imagine senior management was no longer asking questions about why do you need this. It was more asking questions of why can't you implement this faster across the globe. That's always a good thing to have from senior leadership, but more importantly, at least for us, was the demand from the other regions. After Europe implemented, the other regions got very excited and wanted this functionality in place, which accelerated the implementation, because for those of you that have led these type of projects, you understand sometimes there's some resistance. We had basically zero resistance. To the contrary, we had huge amounts of pull, where the regions were fighting to be the second and or third. No one wanted to be last. But we had to make the difficult decisions, and there were other activities happening in the other regions. So Brazil was the last one. But it's been great, and we achieved the timeline that we committed to. Okay. So now if we look at a little bit of the results. Okay. So on average, we've been able to reduce 28% net inbound freight cost versus what we had as a standard, if you will, back in 2012. That was not realized only because of, let's call it tariff or your freight cost management. That represented a portion, right, of the whole. You can see here in red, I think it's about 25%. We saw huge improvements in terms of the rate structures, in terms of having the right type of mode for the right type of need at the right time. So within that, this piece here, the largest piece, was having the forward-looking, the day before look of, should I use LTL or groupage? Should I use a milk run? Should I use a truckload? And that's where we've seen the overall biggest cost benefit. The third area is on utilization, which we manage a portion of our own, let's call it inbound freight and outbound freight with our own equipment. So we have either contracted fleet or our own fleet. So we've been able to better utilize those assets by better planning, as well as integrated inbound and outbound utilization of those assets. So if I've got a truck shipping from Wichita, Kansas up to Minnesota with combines going out, those same trucks can be picking up at suppliers coming back into Kansas. So it worked out quite well. And then the final piece was on the dynamic balancing, which is where the utilizing the forward-looking best setup mode would be. Again, that's going to you're typically looking a few weeks ahead when you're doing that. So move the ship day from Tuesday and Thursday just to Wednesday would be an example. So as on top of the 28% net cost reduction, we've seen overall improvement in network performance in terms of how the suppliers and how the carriers performed, and a nice reduction in terms of the inventory days on hand as a result of having a sustainable inbound product flow and sustainable inbound information on what's coming, where it's at. So with that, we've realized quite a bit of what we call success in various, let's call it external organizations. In Europe, we won the German BBL Logistics Award for Supply Chain Innovation, and we're competing against automotive companies for these type of awards. In 2017, we won the European Logistics Association's Gold Medal for Supply Chain Innovation, again, competing with automotive type companies. Recognized by Forbes with a couple of write-ups, one in 17 and 18 in Supply Chain World, Automotive Logistics. It goes on and on. There's a bunch more that are not here. And one benefit we didn't even think about with this is, as we started to receive these awards, we found a lot more people were very interested in working for AGCO. And within that, the turnover that we had within the group went down significantly. So we have less than a 1% turnover within the materials management logistics group across the globe on average for the past 3 years. And that's a direct result of people wanting to be involved with success, and AGCO's commitment to invest in new technology innovation, which many of the new millennials that are coming out of school very much like to be involved with. And at the end of the day, it has been very, very beneficial for us, as mentioned. I'm actually today in Vienna, Austria, presenting this whole story to a group. Okay, outlook. So this is, just ideas for all of you if you're thinking about putting together, a long-term strategy. If you've already got one, that's great. But from an AGCO perspective, some of the key factors for how we've been able to make this successful is at the beginning we had the global involvement. All of our regions were involved up front, having input on what that future strategy would look like. As changes occurred, because you always have some level of pivoting that's happening, the group would be involved in a decision. And with that, the ownership was created, which also then helped with the implementation. In terms of trying new processes, we call prototype, validate, and grow. What I don't have on there is fail, because sometimes you try something and it doesn't work. But nonetheless, if you don't try something, it's not going to change. So don't be afraid to take some level of risk when doing that. Don't be conservative or too patient in trying something new. Try it. If it fails, okay, it fails. Check it off the boxes. Don't do it again. But if it works, then hey, you're able to see the benefits of that. Along the lines of think global and act local is to create one global vision. That extends outside of supply chain as well. That also includes some level of organization, whether it's sales and marketing, manufacturing, aftermarket. People need to understand, and we definitely did in engineering also, what is it that their future needs were going to be? Where did they see that their business was going to be changing starting again in 2012? And within that, we were able to build out solutions that fit those other functions' needs from the transportation network. And that worked out very, very well for us and created quite a bit of cross-functional synergies. And then the last recommendation here is collaborate and partner up front. Find the right partner that's a good fit for you, not just based on cost, but the right partner based on common cultures, common ways of operating, common leadership styles, because it's a long journey and you don't want to get divorced after a couple of years. It just becomes too expensive and disruptive. So spend a lot of time up front making sure that you've got the right partner along with you for that journey. Okay. So at this point in time, I will thank you for your time and turn it over to questions.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that, Greg. That was very interesting. Right, so in terms of questions, the first one we have is, how did AGCO prioritize where to start its TMS journey?
Okay, that's a good question. So when we pulled the 4 regions together back in 2012, the group, as mentioned, essentially set up a maturity matrix, walked through where each of the regions was at, and then we allowed the regions to basically come up with where do we think we need to start from. And the unanimous decision was Europe, because Europe at the time was the least mature, and Europe was where we had the largest amount of spend that was not only within Europe, but also a large amount of spend that was exported to Asia as well as to North America and South America. And that was part of the risk that we took, because oftentimes companies would say, no way am I going to start with my biggest region. There's too much risk there. We said, we're going to try it, and we did, and it turned out to be very successful.
Okay, brilliant. Another one we have is, who was involved in defining the roadmap?
So in terms of the roadmap, there's a couple different feeding factors. The group, my leadership group, went out and talked to the cross-functional groups, as I mentioned, to gather data in terms of future needs, current challenges that they were aware of, what they would like to receive in terms of service level and performance and cost. We call that kind of our expectations from the cross-functional group. We then basically talked amongst ourselves and basically said, okay, here's what our internal and external customers are looking for. How do we want to solve that or solution that is, I guess, the word that we use. And then from there, we were able to put together a roadmap that senior management supported in terms of a business case. And after that, it was go get it done.
Okay, fantastic. And another, is AGCO happy with the results it's attained so far with the project's delivered benefits?
Yeah, so far so good. Even the financial folks are happy. And we, as part of the way that AGCO operates, we had a large amount of financial teams involvement up front. They were involved in the very beginning of the project because we wanted to ensure that, one, they understood that the cost basis that we were working from, whether that's freight cost, inventory values, whatever it might be. And they were a really important part of setting the business case up and validating what we believe we would be able to get out of it. And from there, they were, after the first year, they were validating the business case and holding us, to, hey, you guys said you're going to do this, what's done? And along the way, we earned a lot of trust and a lot of respect, which enabled us to internally, get the accelerated funding, if you will, or accelerated push, but at the same time, start to realize, hey, we're doing some special stuff here. I've recently read some articles where, 4PLs are now considered the new era in transportation. Well, we started that, 6 years ago, really, in terms of conceptualizing, and started actually using it 5 years ago. So from being a leading edge and almost bleeding edge risk taker, we've had huge levels of success. And mentioned, the financial returns, the performance returns, and very importantly is the retention of our key players. Today there's a huge war for talent, right? Within supply chain, it's very tough, very competitive. And maintaining a cohesive group of individual contributors and leaders is a major asset and a major competitive advantage in today's global environment.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for that. That's all we have time for today, unfortunately. But if anyone does have any other questions for Greg, all of his details are on the screen right now. Otherwise, you can come see him at the American SCMS Summit. He will be presenting there, and then we also do have the European version for any of you that might be based in Europe. Both links for those are in the resources tab, so don't feel afraid to check them out. Also, you will be receiving an email shortly with the on-demand version of this webinar, so if you'd like to forward it on to any friends or colleagues you think might be interested, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, so that's it from me. So I'd just like to extend a massive thank you to Greg for holding the seminar, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.